In case you're like me and you like matching the books that you read to the season that you're in, I thought I would combine a list of book recommendations that I think are perfect for the winter time. So the first group that I have to show you are books that are not only set in winter, but they have really beautiful winter scenery and imagery. And the first one that I have been wanting to read or reread so desperately. It's one of my favorite books, and that is Anne of Green Gables by Ella Montgomery. I am currently rewatching one of my all-time favorite shows, which is Anne with an E. It is a more modern adaptation of Anne of Green Gables. It takes some artistic liberties. There are a lot of scenes and elements in the show that aren't in the original book or book series, but I love what it is still. I do think that I favor the plot and the storyline of the book series rather than the show, but I kind of view them as separate things. Anyway, so I am watching the show, or rewatching it for the millionth time with my husband, and it's his first time watching Anne with an E, and we are just having the most wonderful time, and it's really making me want to reread the books. Anne of Green Gables is about a brother and sister who live on this farm called Green Gables, and they are getting older and they need help on their farm, and so they want to adopt a young boy to help around the farm. And through a mixed communication, they end up sending a girl instead of a boy. They end up sending Anne, and it's about how the brother and sister are trying to deal with the fact that they wanted a boy to help them out, but now they're, stuck with this young girl and they don't know what to do with her. She is very talkative and imaginative. She's fiery and passionate and compassionate and empathetic, and we follow her as she goes through life, and there are a lot of mishaps that happen just from her being a child, from her hot temper, from her imagination, and it's just so wonderful to follow these characters, and I am so attached to them. They are so lovable and loving, and this is such a comfort story for me, and the way that Ella Montgomery describes life on Prince Edward Island, which is where the story is set, it's so captivating. I feel like I am transported into the descriptions when I read any of Ella Montgomery's works, but especially Anne of Green Gables. This has such beautiful natural imagery, especially around the winter time, because of course this is set on Prince Edward Island in Canada, so winter is definitely a very prominent season for them. And it's a beautiful story. It's one of my favorites, and I just can't recommend it enough, no matter what the season is, but I also think it is a really great winter read. And I also can't recommend continuing on with the series, because every single book in the Anne of Green Gables series is special in its own way, and it's just such a beautiful experience to follow Anne throughout her life. The next book is another one of my all-time favorite classics. Many of you, I'm sure, have read it. If you haven't, I can't recommend it enough. And it is another book that doesn't center entirely in the winter season, but there is really beautiful wintry imagery, like in Anne of Green Gables, and that is Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. The opening line is, "Christmas won't be Christmas without any presents," grumbled Jo, lying on the rug. "It's so dreadful to be poor," sighed Meg, looking down at her old dress. "I don't think it's fair for some girls to have lots of pretty things and other girls nothing at all," added little Amy, with an injured sniff. "We've got father and mother and each other, anyhow," said Beth contentedly, from her corner. The four young faces on which the firelight shone brightened at the cheerful words, but darkened again as Jo said sadly, "We haven't got father, and we shall not have him for a long time." She didn't say perhaps never, but each silently added it, thinking of father far away where the fighting was. So it opens with this scene of the four March sisters who we follow throughout the whole novel. Just from that opening scene, you can see the different characters' personalities shine through by what they say in their moments, their quick little sentence of dialogue. And so we go on to follow the four March sisters, Joe, Amy, Beth, and Meg as they go about their lives and they deal with the different things that are happening to them. It's a lot about sisterhood and coming of age and romance and different forms of love and friendship and becoming a mother and just so many different aspects of life at the time. And this story has a very moralistic feeling to it, but I think that's what I love about it so much. It's very nostalgic, it's very comforting, and like I said about Anne of Green Gables, it's such a welcoming and lovable read. The characters are very relatable. I think I see parts of myself in each and every one of the sisters, and this is such a beautiful story, not only for the characters and the message, but also the descriptions. This is set in Concord, Massachusetts in, I believe, the late 1800s, and you can really get a sense of that time period and of the environment. And I love that it opens in the winter time on Christmas morning, because I just think it's a great introduction to the characters and the story. So I love Little Women so much, and I definitely consider it, even though it's set in every season, I definitely consider it a wintry book. If you have read Little Women, I'd love to know if you agree, or if you think that maybe it's more of a springtime read for you or an autumnal read for you. I'd love to know what you think. Similarly to the previous two books that I just mentioned, this next book is again not set entirely in winter, but I consider it more of a winter read, and that is Heidi by Johanna Spyri. I feel so nostalgic about this story because I grew up watching the VHS of the Shirley Temple adaptation of Heidi, and that is just my childhood. So Heidi is about this young girl who ends up staying in the Swiss Alps with her grandfather, and it's about their relationship, which I think this is such a beautiful exploration of familial relationships and a relationship between a grandchild and a grandparent, and the descriptions of the Swiss Alps, especially in the wintertime, they're so vivid and they're so enchanting. I love the quote that they put on the back of the Puffin in Bloom edition. Heidi looked around with growing delight at the mountain peaks she knew so well and which seemed to greet her like old friends. I'm sure many of you aren't going to be surprised with the next book that I am going to recommend, because it is my all-time favorite book, or at least one of them. I have such a hard time saying one book is my all-time favorite, but this one really feels like it's just part of my identity. And this is the Russian edition of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. One of my subscribers sent this to me a few years ago, and it is one of my prized possessions because it is just such an incredibly cool edition. I unfortunately can't read Russian, so this is just a trophy. This is just something that is very cool that I like to flip through and admire. Why I wanted to show this specific edition is because of the very wintry cover. So again, Anna Karenina isn't entirely set in winter, but the scenes that are set in winter are so incredibly stunning, just absolutely stunning. One of my favorite scenes in the book is when two of the main characters are skating, and the narrative surrounding that scene. I have a hard time describing it because it's so much more about what I think people think it's about. It's about infidelity, but it's also about life and humanity and positive relationships and family relationships, friendships, love, hate, loyalty, trust. This book is about life itself. What I love about what Leo Tolstoy does is how he uses Anna and Levin to illustrate his idea that life is full of light and shadow. And I think that all of the characters are very multifaceted, but I do think that Anna's story is very complex and tumultuous, and Levin's story is very much just him trying to be the best person he can be and channeling lightness and hope. And I just love everything about this book, and I can't recommend it enough, and the wintry imagery is just perfect. So, I also wanted to say, if you are the one who sent me this edition, thank you so much. I don't know if I have a note or anything in here. Usually I try to keep the person's name in the book who sent it to me, but I don't think I have any note or anyone's name. So if you sent this to me, thank you so much. It is one of my most prized possessions because I think it's just so incredibly cool for an English speaker. So anyway, I wish I could read this in the original Russian. That is like one of my greatest dreams that unfortunately I don't think I'll ever be able to achieve, but it's such a cool edition. This next book is a book that I read in, I think, 2018 potentially, and I have constantly been thinking about it. This book has never left my mind in the several years since I read it, and I would really love to do a reread at some point, and that is Kristen Hanna's The Great Alone. I was so engrossed in this story when I first read it. This is about a young girl and how her father was a prisoner of war, I believe in Vietnam. Am I correct in thinking that? Yes. And we also follow the 13-year-old daughter whose name is Lenny and her mother whose name is Cora. And it's about how the father is dealing with all of these different traumas. He's dealing with a lot of PTSD from the war, and how he decides, after I think losing multiple jobs, he takes his wife and his daughter to rural Alaska and is hoping for a better future for them, and how it really takes a turn. And we follow the story through Lenny, I believe Lenny's perspective, if I remember correctly. Yes, it's in third person, but one of the lines that I just opened up to says, "When Dad had finally come home, Lenny barely recognized him. The handsome, laughing man of her memory had become moody, quick to anger, and distant. He hated everything about the commune, it seemed, and so they moved. Then they moved again and again. Nothing ever worked out the way he wanted." That is an excerpt from page 5. And so we really see this story through Lenny's eyes and how her family has to deal with the Alaskan wilderness, especially in the wintertime, because obviously the time of daylight is very, very short. I think at some points it's 24 hours of darkness, and I just find the Alaskan wilderness so incredibly fascinating. One of my favorite parts about this story was how Alaska really felt like its own character. Kristen Hanna's writing is so easy to fall into. She's such a captivating author, and yeah, I really want to reread this now. Side note, I also just gifted this to my mother-in-law as an early Christmas present, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing what she thinks. So I would also love to know what you think. If you have read this book, I'd love to know all of your thoughts because, like I said, it's one of my favorites. Now I'm going to move on to books that have a bit more of a central focus on the winter time and winter and snow as a whole. So very, very similar to The Great Alone, we have one of my favorite books that I've read in 2025, and that is The Snow Child by Eowyn Ivey. I read this book earlier this year, and it has become one of my all-time favorite books absolutely ever. It is a retelling of the Russian folktale of the Snow Child, or the Snow Maiden, I believe. And we are following an older couple who I believe are around middle age. They really wanted to have a child, but they were unable to. And they're having a very hard time living where they have always lived, because being surrounded by friends and family, it's a constant reminder of their loss, the fact that they haven't been able to have a child, and their different complex relationships with the people in their lives. So they decided to move to rural Alaska, like The Great Alone, and how it's about them trying to survive in the Alaskan wilderness, especially during the winter time, and how one winter, while they're dealing with a lot of different mixed emotions, and they're dealing with their feelings in very different ways, and they are lacking in communicating with one another. This one night, I think it's the first snowfall, they end up building a child out of snow. And the next morning, the child made out of snow, the snow child, is trampled, and they see a young girl running through the wilderness that is part of their property. The next people that live near them are miles and miles away, and so this child really shouldn't be there, and they're trying to figure out who she is, and it's about how she greatly affects their lives, and how they greatly affect her life. And again, like The Great Alone, Alaska and wintertime and snow are really, really personified and explored in an incredibly interesting way where it makes it feel like another character. Winter really feels like it has its own personality. Snow really feels like an antagonist and also a protagonist in the story, how it complicates their lives, but also how they wish for the snow. For different reasons, I don't want to say too much, but the writing is also exceptional. This is some of the most beautiful, lyrical, but not too lyrical, gorgeous writing. While I was reading this, I truly felt like I just wanted to swim in the words, or I just wanted to make a snow angel in these beautiful words. And I can't recommend this book enough. This was my first book that I read from Eowyn Ivey, and now I have her other two books, The Bright Edge of the World and Blackwood's Blue Sky. Those are the other two books that she has written, and I haven't read them yet, but I'm very excited to, hopefully this winter. And I just truly cannot recommend this book enough, because I think it's brilliant. On a very different note, the next book that I want to recommend is Flower Fairies of the Winter by Cicely Mary Barker. This is a beautiful collection of poems and illustrations about different flower fairies that relate to flowers and trees of the winter time. And I fell in love with these books when I was a child, and then for some reason I lost my copies. To this day I don't know where they went, and I rediscovered them earlier this year, well actually a few months ago, and I just love these books so much. I am really such a nature lover, and if you don't know, I am an illustrator and a writer, and so what Cicely Mary Barker has done with this series of poems and illustrations, it's just everything that I adore. And the different flower fairies in here, I'll just give you an example. I love this one so much. This is The Song of the Holly Fairy, and I'll read it to you. It says, "Oh, I am green in winter time, when other trees are brown. Of all the trees, so saith the rhyme, the holly bears the crown. December days are drawing near, when I shall come to town, and carol boys go singing clear, of all the trees, oh hush and hear, the holly bears the crown. For who so well beloved and merry as the scarlet holly berry?" I love how they rhyme. I love how charming they are. They have so much spirit in them. This one is The Flower Fairies of Winter, but there is also Autumn, Summer, and Spring. I can't recommend these books enough because they are just so beautiful, absolutely gorgeous, and incredibly charming. And I love them. Keeping with the genre of poetry, one of my favorite poets to read in the wintertime, not only because his name perfectly fits the winter season, but his poems, a lot of them are set in winter and about winter, and they feel wintry, and that is Robert Frost. I love the fact that his last name is Frost, and to me he just feels like a winter poet. Well, one of my favorites is of course The Road Not Taken, which I feel like is everybody's favorite, but for good reason. Then there is also Christmas Trees, An Old Man's Winter Night, A Patch of Old Snow. Birches is one of my all-time favorite poems. I even did an illustration for Birches when I was in art school. Birches is on the longer side, so I will just read the beginning of it, and then maybe it'll intrigue you to want to continue reading the rest. "When I see birches bending to left and right across the line of straighter, darker trees, I like to think some boy's been swinging them. But swinging doesn't bend them down to stay. Ice storms do that. Often you must have seen them loaded with ice a sunny winter morning after a rain. They click upon themselves as the breeze rises and turn many-colored, as the stir cracks and crazes their enamel. Soon the sun's warmth makes them shed crystal shells, shattering and avalanching on the snow crust. Such heaps of broken glass to sweep away. You'd think the inner dome of heaven had fallen. I could keep going, but that gorgeous winter imagery is just breathtaking. The next book is one of my favorite books that I read at the end of 2024, and that is The Bear and the Nightingale by Carolyn Marie. Once again, this is based on Russian folklore and fairy tales. And as you can tell, I really love Russian literature and I really love Russian folktales and fairy tales. The back says, "Beware the evil in the woods. In a village at the edge of the wilderness in northern Russia, where the wind blows cold and the snow falls many months of the year, an elderly servant tells stories of sorcery, folklore, and the Winter King to the children of the family. Tales of old magic frowned upon by the church. But for the young, wild Vasya, these are far more than just stories. She alone can see the house spirits that guard her home, and sense the growing forces of dark magic in the woods." And why I wanted to read the back is because I didn't want to give too much away, and I feel like when I'm really passionate about a story, I have a hard time articulating how much I love it and what it's about, because my brain is just like, it's amazing, blah, 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 blah. I really loved Carolyn Marie's way of building this world and how she got the inspiration from the Russian folk tales and fairy tales. And you don't have to know those folk tales and fairy tales to appreciate the book. This book really reminded me of what I love about Russian literature, folk tales, fairy tales, and I just loved the story. Again, like some of these other books, Winter really felt like another character, and it almost was another character. This book had me gripped. I did not want to put it down, and it is a perfect winter read. It is the first book in a series of 3 books. The second book is The Girl in the Tower, and the third book is The Winter of the Witch, and I'm hoping to read The Winter of the Witch this winter. But anyway, you could, I think, read this as a standalone. I think it stands pretty well on its own. But I think once you read it, you're going to want to keep going. And I just really admire Carolyn Marie as an author. The next book that I want to tell you about is on the bleaker side, although I think there's a lot of beauty in the bleakness. And that is Ethan Frome by Edith Wharton. This is a very short novel, so I don't want to say too much about it. I feel like the back gives too much away, and I don't want to say anything, like, I don't know how else to word it without giving too much away. It does say, different in both tone and theme from Wharton's other works, Ethan Frome has become perhaps her most enduring and most widely read book. Again, it is very heartbreaking and devastating, but I think there's so much to be thought and felt after reading this book. I think it's worth the read, but you have to be prepared. You have to be prepared for this slightly bleak book, but there's so much beauty in it as well. This next book is another one that is quite bleak, but it also has so much hope and heart in it as well, and it has been getting a lot of attention for very good reason, and it's from one of my favorite authors, and that is Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan. This main character named Bill Furlong, he is a coal and I believe coal and timber merchant during his busiest seasons in the weeks leading up to Christmas. It is set in 1985, and it is about how he's going through his rounds delivering coal to the different houses and businesses, and how he discovers something very dark and complicated that's going on in his small town, and how the small town is very much controlled by the church, and how people are not wanting to speak up about something that they should speak up about because of the control that certain people have in the town. And it's about right and wrong and going against what people tell you to do, being silenced and fighting against things that you believe are morally wrong, and it's just a beautiful exploration on humanity. There's a blurb from Hilary Mantel on the cover, and it says, "Wastes not a word, exquisite." And I couldn't agree more. It feels like every single word in this book was picked and chosen and written with such precision, and I really admire Claire Keegan's ability to pack such an incredible punch in such a short novel, and I cannot recommend it enough. It's just one of the most impactful books I've ever read, one of the most thought-provoking books, and it also has an incredible movie adaptation with Cillian Murphy, which I saw, and it was such a beautiful, faithful adaptation. Thankfully, this sticker is actually not on the book. It is an actual sticker, but I saw the movie in a cinema while I was staying in Bristol in England while my husband was doing his master's in England. So I'm kind of sentimental about this sticker. I sort of don't want to take it off because it reminds me of when we saw it in the cinema. But anyway, I love this book very much, and I think Claire Keegan is an incredible writer, and this book is obviously perfect for the winter time because it is set in the winter time, solely in the winter time. It's just a very atmospheric book. I think the cold weather really enhances the overall feelings and mood of the story. The last book that I have to recommend is one of my new favorite books. It's new-ish. I read it for the first time last November, and that is The Skull by John Klassen. So you would expect maybe this book for me to recommend it for the autumn, and I definitely do recommend it for the autumn, but I also really recommend it for the winter, as you can tell from the cover, because there is a lot of snow in the book. The whole book is set in the winter time, and the wintry illustrations are incredibly gorgeous. I mean, I am such a fan of John Klassen's work. He's such a wonderful writer and illustrator, and this book is about a young girl who runs away from home in the middle of the night, in the middle of winter, and she finds this mansion, and inside this mansion, when she knocks on the door, a bodiless skull answers and invites her in and shares a secret with her. What I love is what John Klassen has done with expanding the traditional picture book and pushing the boundaries of darkness in children's literature, and I think what he's doing with this story is really powerful, and I think this is so perfect for anyone of any age. The way that he composes the illustrations, I don't want to give too much away just showing the illustrations, but they're unbelievably gorgeous and very, very snowy, which I love so much. So I read it for the first time last November, and I already reread it this year in October, but I already want to reread it again in November and December. This is just such an incredible book, and I really love it, and I think that adults would also really love it, not only children, which I'm the biggest advocate for children's literature, if you don't know. And anyway, I think what John Klassen, or Klassen, I always say Klassen, but you pronounce it Klassen. What John Klassen has done with this story is fascinating, and I also really love the afterword where he talks about his inspiration and where this story came from, and how it was inspired by a folktale. So, as you can tell, I really love folktales and fairy tales, and that is another example of that. But anyway, these are all of the books that I wanted to mention and recommend for you to read in the wintertime. I really hope you found something that piqued your interest. I would love to know if you've read any of these and what other books you recommend for the wintertime. So definitely leave your own recommendations in the comments. I am very much looking forward to seeing your recommendations and continuing to plan my winter reading and to see what I am going to read in the wintertime. And hopefully it'll lead to more recommendations because I'll find more favorites. But anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope that you enjoyed it, and I will see you very soon in another video. And as always, happy reading.